All right. Ready? Excellent. So welcome to the very first introductory lecture here at the Hawaii Cannabis Expo. My name is Amy Robertson Nielsen. I am a doctoral clinical student in clinical nutrition. I will be graduating with my doctoral degree in May. I'm very excited about that. Today we're going to talk about my favorite subject, which is cannabis sativa and Crohn's disease. So Crohn's disease is a gastrointestinal, it's a stomach and GI tract kind of condition. And we're going to talk about whether or not whole plant cannabis is going to be a potential for pathway for long-term remission. So again, my name is Amy Nielsen, as it says here. I'm a doctoral candidate in clinical nutrition. My university is Maryland University of Integrative Health. I am also a traditional Western herbalist. I am a chef. I'm a community health worker. And I work out in the Hauula, Ko'olauloa area. Disclosures, I have no financial disclosures. All this research is my own. This is a narrative review based on my clinical observations and my personal clinical research. This is how we tell stories in science literature. Narrative reviews are usually a topic and then a discussion of what is currently in literature for that topic. So let's dive right in. What is the historical and anecdotal evidence for cannabis sativa in abdominal and GI tract issues? This is from the Felter and Lloyd quote that we have up here. Is, if you read the date on that, 1898. So this is a very old quote. I like going back in history. This plant has been around and working with us for more than 5,000 years. It predates humans. So Felter and Lloyd, way back in 1898, said it should be administered in painful states of the stomach, as in gastric neuralgia, nervous gastralgia, gastric ulcers, where opium is inadmissible and pain is due to indigestion. So way back then, they already knew that this plant was useful for these things. Patients often report that cannabis can relieve the symptoms including abdominal pain, nausea, diarrhea, anorexia and cachexia. Cachexia is the inability to eat. It improves your mood. It improves your quality of life. Currently, about 7 to 18% of IBD patients report using cannabis to relieve their symptoms. However, only about a third of patients actually report their use to their medical professionals. That talks about the stigma that we still have in the industry and in the world for this plant. However, we do know that it's been being used way back in the 1800s and way back beyond that. We know that this plant has been working with us for about 5,000 years now. So what is Crohn's disease? This is a picture of the inside of your GI tract, of the inside of your small intestine. And it talks specifically about transmural means that this disease goes all the way through all of the tissue types that are in your GI tract. It starts at the inside. This is where your food comes in right here. And then this would be down to your blood system and the rest of your system here. So it goes all the way through as shown out right here. There is a specific genetic component that goes along with this, with a gene called the NOD2 gene. It's a pathway that talks about inflammation. There is a derangement to the ability to distinguish the commensal versus pathogenic bacteria. We have our microbiome that lives in our GI tract. This NOD2 gene changes how we are able to understand and assess the problem bacteria that are in our GI tract and those that are supposed to be there. It upregulates the inflammatory process. It causes what's called skip lesions. So that means on the inside of the GI tract, you will have areas that have inflammation and areas that don't. Those areas have this really very distinct cobblestone look. That's what they're talking about here, is this cobblestoning look here. And then on the outside of your intestine, there's this very specific brown fat cap. It's called mesenteric fat, mesenteric adipose tissue, and that's the other distinguishing tissue for Crohn's disease. The way that it works, the way that we develop Crohn's disease, there are these causative agents, things that cause Crohn's disease. We don't know exactly how we develop Crohn's disease, but we think that it starts with some bacteria, viruses, and possibly dietary inflammation. Then we get some other environmental inflammation, environmental triggers, and then we get some of our genetic pieces as well. That causes these intestinal bacteria to get all, to change their communities, and change their digestive enzymes and the bile acids that you have in your system. So those are depleted in this system. Some of the initiating triggers for Crohn's disease, toxicant-induced loss of tolerance. This is something, we were talking about this a little bit earlier just before we started this presentation. We live in an environment, our bodies are designed to live in an environment where we have 80% good stuff and 20% bad stuff. That's why we have a liver and that's why we have kidneys, to clear that bad stuff out of our system. These days, we live in a world where we have 80% bad stuff and 20% good stuff, right? So that's that toxicant-induced loss of tolerance means that there's so many toxicants out there that we lose tolerance for everything. So we don't have the ability to clear anything. So other initiating triggers for this, number one is smoking. Number one cause for Crohn's disease is smoking. Also, lower plasma levels of vitamin D. We all live inside, we put on lots of sunscreen. Even here in Hawaii, we have a large number of our population that has a very low amount of vitamin D in their system. Increasing your vitamin D increases the ability for your GI tract to stay intact. Oral contraceptives can be an initiating trigger. Postmenopausal hormone replacement, so all those ladies on HRT, this is another one. Aspirins and NSAIDs. We already know that aspirin and NSAIDs are really good at poking holes in your GI tract. That causes inflammation, that causes that transmural, that all the way through the tissues, that causes that kind of lesion in there. Antibiotics. Antibiotics shift the way that your microbiome works, and the ratios of bacteria, commensal bacteria in your microbiome, and that can cause or initiate a Crohn's flare or a Crohn's episode. Depression and psychosis stress, psychological stress. We know that psychological stress increases inflammation in the body, and no different with Crohn's disease. And then diet. NOD2, Crohn's disease is caused by a loss of regulatory capacity of the immune apparatus. So what does that mean? Regulatory capacity, how we regulate it. Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it absorbing and is it not absorbing? The immune apparatus is our immune system in our GI tract. NOD2 is a intercellular bacterial sensor. That means that it lives between your cells and it senses the bacteria between your cells, and its mutations are associated with the development of Crohn's disease. IBD also is part of this and is thought to be a result from the inappropriate and continuing activation of this system, of the mucosa, of that lining of your GI tract. And this is driven by the presence of your normal, the normal commensal bacteria. So where does the endocannabinoid system sit in terms of the rest of the systems in our body? Well, the endocannabinoid system, short ECS because it's a really long word, sits right here in the middle between your central nervous system, your HPA axis, that's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. That's where your stress is regulated, that's where your hormones is regulated, and then your immune system over here. So the endocannabinoid system sits in between those three and regulates the three of them. It modulates the tone of the three of them. Where do we find problems with the endocannabinoid system that may be expressed in other places? If you have low endocannabinoid tone in your central nervous system and your HPA axis, you might end up with cardiovascular function issues. If you have a low endocannabinoid tone between your immune system and your HPA axis, you might end up with fat regulation, lipid regulation concerns. And then between the immune system and the central nervous system, you may end up with glucose regulation concerns. And that's where type 2 diabetes comes in. So lipid regulation is going to be obesity, cardiovascular function, and then glucose regulation. What does the normal endocannabinoid look like in the human GI tract? This is a really, really great paper. If you're interested in the GI tract and the endocannabinoid system, please take a look at this 2016 paper. It's really, really good and goes into some very, very specific detail about where in the GI tract the different cannabinoid, the different parts of the endocannabinoid system are maintained. So in the GI epithelium, that means those are the cells that are right between, that are the ones that are actually doing the absorbing, that are right there, touching the microbiome, touching the food, touching things like that that are coming through. There's a lot of CB1. There's a lot of, these are two enzymes of synthesis, so that means that they are making parts of the endocannabinoid system. And then these two down here, NAPDL and DAGL, those ones are degrading, so those ones are clearing the endocannabinoid system. Those are in your epithelium, so those are in the cells of the lining of your gut. The enteric nervous system, your GI tract has its own nervous system. I'm sure you've heard that the GI tract is your second brain, so your gut is your second brain. If you think about it, we have a gut reaction to something, right? You know it, and that has a very specific feel in your body. That's exactly this right here. That's where CB1 and CB2 are both very highly expressed in that enteric nervous system. So in that's remember if we go back to the other slide, that's this space right here. That's right here between the central nervous system and your immune system. That's your enteric nervous system here. Your blood vessels and your smooth muscle layers. There's a lot of CB1 and CB2 receptors down there as well as some of our enzymes of synthesis and degradation down there. So what happened? That's the normal side. That's what it's supposed to normally look like, right? When we get to inflammation for in your GI tract, in the epithelium, in those cells that are lining your GI tract, CB2 goes way up in inflammation. We're going to talk about why CB2 goes way up in inflammation. You see that the MAGL and the DAGL, those are the two enzymes of synthesis, so those make the endocannabinoids in your body. Those are also upregulated. However, NAPDL, which is a degradation, which is one of those enzymes that clears your endocannabinoids, that goes down. So what does that say? If CB2 goes up and the enzymes of synthesis go up, it means that it's working on modulating that tone. And if the enzyme of degradation goes down, it means that it's holding those things that are helping relieve the inflammation in the system longer, because you can't clear them as quickly when that's down. Lumina propria immunocytes, that's a big fancy science word. Lumina propria is the hole that the food goes down. Remember, you've got a big tube through the middle of your body. That's called the lumina propria, that space inside there that the food goes down, that's called the lumina propria. Immunocytes are immune cells. Immunocytes are cells. So immune cells. So in those immune cells that are living inside your GI tract, inside the tube that's your GI tract, they have increased CB2, again, especially macrophages. Macrophages like to go and eat things. And then again, the enzymes of synthesis, which means that they are making more of those endocannabinoids to, again, bring that tone down, bring that inflammation down. There are lots of herbs that work on this system. There are lots of herbs that work very, very well on this system. My favorite one, believe it or not, is very simple: chamomile. Cannabis, however, has all sorts of its own cannabinoids. We know that the entourage effect, so cannabis has lots of different compounds in it, We know that cannabinoids, THC, CBD, CBN, CBG, CBV, all of those, and then more, because we don't even know all the ones that are out there yet. We're still learning about all of them. Each of them has a different action in there, right? So each of them does a different thing. So if you look at reduces inflammation here, look at all these cannabinoids that reduce inflammation. Why do you think cannabis is so great for reducing inflammation? Because it's got lots of different things that do it, and they hit lots of different targets in the body. So when we hear, well, cannabis does everything, yes, it does, for a very good reason, that entourage effect, right, for all of those cannabinoids in there. So they have these constituents, these cannabinoids, have very specific herbal actions in different places. Choosing the right combination of cannabinoids is a very big target for future research. Where is that important? Your strain or your chemovar, right? Your chemovar is your chemical compounds, is the chemical signature of the plant that you're growing right now. Each one of them, as you know, has different chemical signature. That signature is very important in terms of when you are, what you're going to do with that. So if you want to have one that's going to be reducing inflammation, maybe you want to grow a strain that has as many cannabinoids in it as possible. But if you're going to do something like you want to stimulate appetite, maybe you want to focus on one that's got high THC. Remember, there is significant variation in the plant, between plants, between clones grown by different people. And then when you get that into a human being, every human being has a different endocannabinoid tone and different ways that your body is going to use those cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are lipid and ethanol soluble, which means that they are fat soluble and they are alcohol soluble. They are not water soluble. Cannabinoids are not water soluble. There are lots of things that you can pull out of cannabis that is water soluble, as in tea, but cannabinoids are not one of them. So let's talk about how these specific, I apologize for the next few slides. They are very wordy, so there's a lot of information on here. I did this so that if you want the slides, please, at the end, feel free to email me, come out to my booth. I'm at 106. I can send you the slides today if you want any of this information. So CBG. So CBG, cannabigerol, inhibits MRSA film biofilms. So MRSA, it's a really, really great big infection that lives in your skin and that lives by creating these biofilms. It breaks up those biofilms. It eradicates up to 50% of persistent cells in a dose-dependent manner in as little as 30 minutes. That's pretty amazing for MRSA. Pretty amazing for MRSA. It has super antibacterial properties as well. CBG is also anti-proliferative, which means it makes cells not replicate as fast. That might be helpful in cancer. Antibacterial, we know that that's going to be good again for MRSA and a few other things. And anti-glaucoma, right? So anti-glaucoma, so it helps reduce the glaucoma in your eyes. CBD, my favorite. I love CBD. It's my favorite cannabinoid. Inhibits inflammation. Inflammation is runaway inflammation is the basis for all diseases. So CBD really inhibits inflammation, and we know now a lot of different ways. If you come to my talk on CBD and type 2 diabetes, we're going to talk a lot about how CBD inhibits inflammation. CBD has a potent antiemetic effect. Antiemetic is anti-nausea. So this is part of the reason why this cannabinoid works really, really well for those folks that are going through cancer treatment and are going through chemotherapy and have a lot of nausea. So CBD is really great for that. Okay, a lot more science here. Blocks the activation of NADPH oxidase associated with ROS is reactive oxygen species formation, and TNF alpha is an inflammatory mediator in the body. Reactive oxygen species. So we know that oxygen causes damage. So oxygen, when you put a nail out, then oxygen, like anything any metal, oxygen causes it to rust. Does the same thing for cells in your body. It doesn't make them rust, but it helps degrade them. So this here helps block the formation of those reactive oxygen species. That's CBD. CBDV, cannabidiol, oh, I can't pronounce it right now, but it's got the varin on the end of it. CBDV is really, really, really interesting. CBD and THC, as we know now through a lot of chemistry, we now see a lot of CBD. That's THC, we see delta 8 THC, right? So that's a chemical isomer, which means it's a slightly changed version of CBD that turns into THC. In this particular case, CBDV turns into THCV under acidic conditions, and both significantly inhibit nausea. So it may not be the CBD, it may be the CBDV that's inhibiting the nausea in a big entourage that comes out of a plant you're not sure about. THCV has anti-inflammatory action, that's CB2, in mice. We're going to talk about mice in a minute. It reduces edema and thermal hypoalgesia, which means that it reduces edema and it reduces pain sensation from heat specifically. It also suppresses food intake and weight gain at CB1. The problem with that is that it also induces psychosis at the same time through CB1. We've done a lot of research on using the CB1 receptor specifically for food intake and weight gain or weight loss. In the early 90s, mid-90s, there was, sorry, not mid-90s, early 2000s, that's when it was, because this was found in mid-90s, but early 2000s. They did a lot of work, researchers did a lot of work on CB1, thinking that we're gonna stuff up all those CB1 receptors and we're gonna make you lose a whole lot of weight. Well, we made you lose a whole lot of weight, but we also induced psychosis at the same time. And that's because these receptors are throughout the body. They're not only in the lower GI tract, they're not only in the lower half of your body, but they're in your brain as well. So if you block it in your lower half of your body, it will go through the blood-brain barrier and it will change the way that it affects your brain. THC, we love THC. It's the one that makes us all happy and stuff. However, THC is able to reverse and suppress macrophage activation. This is good and bad. So macrophages are the little cells that like to go and eat things. They're the munchy guys like this. When you reverse and suppress those, that may be a good thing if they're running away with your system. But if they're not, then you may not want to suppress those, because you really want to make sure that those macrophages are still doing their job, right? THCA. We have our acid forms. Anybody remember the difference between THC and THCA? THC is decarboxylized, right? So THCA is the acid form. That comes from plants that have not been heated. If you heat THC, you bang off that acid, and then you get THC. THCA, through one very specific receptor called GPR55, is super anti-inflammatory. So you may not want to burn all of your cannabis. Maybe you want to make a tincture or a sublingual that's out of raw or cured cannabis where you're using the THCA, and that's going to help you as an anti-inflammatory modulator as well. THCP. I can guarantee very few people in this room have heard about THCP. So THCP is the perfect fit for the CB1 receptor. There's very little of this in most cannabis strains. Very, very little of it, because it has the highest affinity for CB1 and it induces the highest psychological or intoxicating effect. and that's THCP. However, THCP also has a 33 to 63% higher affinity for those things than the THCA or the THCV that we talked about before. So that means that it's going to do those things, that anti-inflammatory thing that THCA does, it's going to do it even better, up to 33 to 63% better. Tiny little bits in your plant, though. Tiny little bits. Terpenes. So we've talked about all the cannabinoids, or at least a few of the cannabinoids, and how they're going to modulate the inflammation and how they're going to modulate some of the other factors in Crohn's disease in your GI tract, specifically lowering the inflammation and modulating how the cells connect together in your GI tract. Terpenes are the most studied of any of the constituents pretty much of any plant medicine are the terpenes. This paper, if you've ever read Dr. Russo's 2011 paper down here, this diagram is directly from that paper. If you have not read this paper, if you've not read anything by Dr. Russo, stop, open up your phone, look up Dr. Russo, cannabis, and read everything he's written. He also has a ton of really amazing interviews and things like that out there that you can listen to instead of having to read his papers, where he talks a lot about this. But he is super interested in terpenes in particular. So terpenes are bioactive molecules that are responsible for the smell of essential oils. They are the most bioactive compounds in any plant. So bioactive means that it's going to work on your body, right? Bioactive. They are water soluble, not lipid soluble, not fat soluble. And they are very volatile, all right? Remember we said that cannabinoids are not water soluble? These guys are water soluble, some of them. How do terpenes affect motility in Crohn's flares? Motility means how fast your GI tract is processing things. Diarrhea, that's motility, right? Constipation, that's motility, right? I'm a nutritionist, I talk a lot of poop, okay? It's just what I do, especially working with Crohn's and other GI disorders. However, this is a really great little diagram here about some of our most common of our terpenes out here. The difficulty with using terpenes therapeutically is that they're so volatile. You open it up, you know, if you've opened a container of a little essential oil of peppermint, I could put an essential oil of peppermint out there in the back corner of this room, and within 15 minutes I'll be able to smell it up here. Those molecules move around very quickly. So they're very hard to sort of to get into medicines. However, they are super helpful in terms of motility. So these are ones that we find in cannabis a lot. Myrcene. We find myrcene in, myrcene is sort of a musky, peppery kind of smell or taste. Pinene smells like pine trees. Yes, it does. Phytol is not one that we talk an awful lot about. It has sort of another musky sort of smell to it. Terpinolene and alpha terpiol, those two are sort of spicy, and they are also in cloves and in cinnamon. Limonene here, lemons, limes. That's where that one comes from. Linalool is in lavender as well. And beta-caryophyllene. Beta-caryophyllene is the one that's in the vast majority of plants out there that have any kind of smell to it. Beta-caryophyllene is in most of, when you have an indica that's really sleepy, then that's what you're smelling. I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly. I'm not going to read through each of these ones specifically, but know that alpha-pinene is anti-inflammatory. It's a bronchodilator. It's a memory aid. Alpha-pinene in rosemary. Rosemary for remembrance. That's what you're thinking about here. It's a potent antibiotic. Limonene is a precursor to every other terpene. So limonene can turn into lots of other things too. It's very readily metabolized. It's also possibly stored in your adipose tissue, just like your cannabinoids are stored in your adipose tissue and your fat tissues. It's anxiolytic, and immune producing. It's an antioxidant. Beta-caryophyllene is a full agonist to CB2. So this guy down here, beta-caryophyllene is a full agonist to CB2. That means it attaches to the CB2 receptor really, really well. Super anti-inflammatory. Caryophyllene oxide is a different compound than beta-caryophyllene, but it works very similarly. It's an antifeedant for insects on plants, but it does similar things to your gut. So it's antifungal and antiplatelet aggregation. So if you have cardiovascular disease, this might be one that you're looking for. Myrcene we talked about, reducing inflammation. It's also a muscle relaxant, and it's also analgesic, which means that it deals with pain. Linalool, think about lavender. Where do we see lavender? We see lavender in all of our sleep aids, and that's exactly what it does. It's super sedating. It's also helps with pain, anti-nociceptive, anticonvulsant, anxiolytic, which means it's a pain, and then it's sedating. Nerolidol is an interesting one. It's also very sedating. It smells musty, like basement musty. So if you've got a cannabis strain that you open it up and go, ooh, that smells like my grandma's basement, that's this one here. That's nerolidol. Phytol increases GABA, which means it's going to slow your system down. But it also prevents vitamin A tetragenesis, which means that it helps vitamin A not switch forms. What are the problems in the current available literature? There is plenty of evidence that's discussing the metabolism and function of cannabis sativa, but there's not an awful lot of objective evidence in literature supporting specifically Crohn's disease. So we know a lot of things that it can do to help with Crohn's disease, like anti-inflammatory, antiemetic, helps with nausea, helps with motility, but there are no studies, or very few studies, and we'll show you them in a second, that talk about Crohn's disease specifically. Population studies, it's super hard to do human trials right now. We can't even do them in the United States. All the human trials are being done in Europe or in Israel still. And the safety profile. There are several adverse reactions noted for cannabis, believe it or not. We know that certain strains and certain amounts of THC can cause certain people to have psychosis, psychotic episodes. We also know that for some people, CBD and THC can cause GI upset. A couple of other ways that it may or may not be the right substance for certain people. There are no deaths reported from cannabis. That's because there are no CB receptors in the brainstem, which is where you control your breathing, and that's where you get in trouble if you have the cells in your brainstem and controlled breathing. That's when we get into problems with like cocaine and things like that, where it changes your respiration, it changes your breathing. There are none of those in cannabis. And it is generally well tolerated by most people. So this is the extent of all of the studies currently that we have with cannabis, humans, and Crohn's disease. Count them, 3. That's it, right? Because we can't do this work yet. Yet is the big problem, the big word there. Yet. We want to be able to do this research. Descheduling is the way to do that. Not rescheduling, descheduling. Why do we need to have human studies rather than mouse studies? Well, mice are great, and we know a lot about how cannabis works in mice. But we also know that particularly for Crohn's disease, remember at the very beginning we talked about the NOD2 genes and how those affect the sensing of the right microbes in your GI tract, and that's what's specifically broken in Crohn's disease, is this NOD2. Well, In humans that are homozygous, means that we have 2 copies of this particular SNP, this particular variant of the NOD2 gene, me, develop Crohn's disease automatically. Mice, doesn't happen. They have to induce it. They have to give the mice stuff that makes their GI tract bad in order to make them have Crohn's disease. So we're not using the same cells, the same pathways, the way that they happen in the in the human GI tract. The other problem is that in mice, their CB2 receptor functions and looks very different. Whole different amino acid sequence, whole different receptor sites sitting where it sits on the cells, whole different places that they sit in the body. So that's going to change how that system works. So mice, not the greatest analog for humans in terms of Crohn's disease and and cannabis cannabis work specifically. Mice are cute. We know a lot of things about mice, just not an awful lot about Crohn's and cannabis yet. Questions? Any questions and conversations from the group out there? I know. I'm the first one. It's quiet. Yes, go ahead.
Well, again, this part you said, maybe this was answered, but with terpenes, right, are you really getting the same terpene profile if you're getting it in an edible or a tincture versus the actual flower when it's fresh?
No, you can't possibly be, unless they are augmented to simulate the same strain, because terpenes are so incredibly volatile. So and this is a good question, when you extract from cannabis, how you extract, my favorite teacher, Dr. Kevin Spellman, says when you make an extraction from cannabis, you make a decision as to what you're going to leave behind. So every time you choose whether you're going to use alcohol, or you're going to use glycerin, or you're going to smoke or anything like that, you choose what you're going to leave behind. And that's why your tincture of AC/DC is going to work differently than an edible with AC/DC, than smoking AC/DC, than even vaping AC/DC. So it's going to be different because every time you make an extraction, you choose what you're going to leave behind, and you're only using those things that can be extracted in that particular process. So with terpenes, it's doubly that way because of the volatility of those compounds. Good question. Anything else? Any other questions?
So like if you're wanting a certain terpene profile, then are you going to want to maybe have the freshest flower to ensure you're getting that specific terpene profile?
Yes. If you want, the question was, if you want the specific terpene profile, should you look for the freshest flower with that terpene profile? Absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe you want to find out what that terpene profile is, go and have your cannabis tested and find out what the terpene profile is, and augment that, add essential oils. Right? So you can smoke your cannabis and then have your diffuser going with the same cannabinoid, the same terpene profile that's going to augment what you already are smoking in your pipe or wherever, right? So that's one way of doing that.
Stacking your wellness.
Exactly, stacking your wellness. Exactly. Using as many senses as possible. Remember, these receptors and these cells, these are in every cell in your body. When we become us at a cellular level, we use all of our cells to do that. So we're not just using the cells in our bronchioles in our lungs when we're smoking cannabis. We're using our nose, we're using our mouth, we're using all of those pieces, right? We're using our GI tract as well, because some of that's going to go down there too, right? So if you can stack it, if you can augment. So this is one that I've heard recently, and I'm sure you guys have heard too, mangoes and cannabis, right? So mangoes have natural cannabinoids in them. And if you take those, if you make an edible with mangoes and your cannabis, you will have a different impact because they have their own cannabinoids that are augmenting that system.
So that's why in India they drink the mango lassi with the...
Yep, exactly, because you're stacking. Now Ayurveda is so in India, you're talking about in India, Ayurveda is the master of stacking. Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, both of those systems have been around so much longer than conventional Western medicine that they already understand all these pieces, and they've been doing this for so much longer, and stacking those things is absolutely what they do. And notice they're also using diet, right? Because diet is where you get a lot of your cannabinoids too. All right, any other questions? Sure. One more.
So I'm just curious. I know there's lots of different reasons people will have a different impact, right? So for me, for example, I don't feel anything when I just CBD, and versus other people, it will calm them, or like there's an impact.
Yep.
And
yep.
Can you explain a little bit about what makes?
Sure. That has to do with your endocannabinoid tone. So your tone is the number of receptors of all the various varieties of receptors in in your endocannabinoid system, and you may have a lower tone for CBD than somebody else does. So if you naturally have a lower tone for CBD, you will not have as much of a reaction to that to the ligand, to the thing that's going to attach to those cells. It also is going to depend on how you ingested that. So edibles, the least useful and the least effective and the least easy to titrate, so easy to sort of dose for yourself, because it's so dependent on what you ate, what you drank, whether you've got good bile function, do you even have a gallbladder, do you not? So edibles are really, really the least we call efficacious. So it's got the least profile for safety profile and useful profile for us. The fastest one is oral buccal. So through your cheeks or through under your tongue, sublingual or through your cheeks. Those are either glycerins or alcohols. There are some new nanotechnologies that are buccal as well, but those are your most effective ways. Obviously, the fastest way to get it in is through your lungs. Second is through your oral mucosal spray. Any other questions?
Can
All
a
right.
person find out their endocannabinoid tone?
No, not yet. Not yet. Yet is the operative term. We're working on it. We're working on it. You can test for your cannabinoids. You can test for your endocannabinoids, AEA, TUAG. There are blood tests to do that. They're not they're very specialized tests still. It's not like you can go to LabCorp and say, I want an endocannabinoid test and test all my endocannabinoids. It would be great. We're hoping that that's going to be happening soon, but it hasn't happened yet. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, everybody. Let me give you the last of my information. So again, here's my information. My contact information is down here on the bottom. I am over at booth 106, so you're welcome to come over and have a chat with me. Sit on my couch and have a chat with me. Thanks so much for coming, everybody. I appreciate it.